They say that a movie's only as good as its villain, but the same can most definitely be true for its hero as well. And if there was ever a film to prove that, it would be The Nightmare Before Christmas. Because simply put, Jack Skellington is what makes the movie the masterpiece it's hailed as today. If he hadn't been written so perfectly, then that would have single-handedly dragged down the entire film. And today, I'd like to go over Jack's character in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and specifically what makes him such a great hero. And as always, there will be spoilers ahead. So in case you've never seen this movie and somehow don't know what happens, you might want to come back to this video another day. Okay, so to get right into it, probably the best thing about Jack Skellington overall is just how nice and gentlemanly he is. Because as the embodiment of the holiday of Halloween, which celebrates all things scary and disturbing, one would expect him to be almost evil in nature, or at the very least a somewhat sick and depraved individual. But instead he's not only one of the most normal people in all of Halloween Town, but also the nicest guy you could ever meet. Seriously, just from his first few scenes alone, he instantly pulls the viewer in with both how relatable and surprisingly human he is, as well as how he puts on a polite act for the residents' sake, but in actuality is bored out of his mind to the point that he's starting to fall into despair over it. And again, the fact that he doesn't involve anybody else in his problems, even if it's partially motivated by his belief that nobody would understand, only highlights his extremely considerate nature. He's honestly a character that you want to see succeed in living out his dreams and passions, if only because he's just so nice and excitable that he deserves it. And speaking of that, there's also that he's one of the few animated heroes out there that not only fails to achieve his goal on every level, but has his entire plan be framed as in the wrong from almost the very beginning. But where the movie is particularly smart is in how it manages to accomplish this while keeping Jack firmly sympathetic and making sure the audience never loses sympathy for him. Because as I went on at length about in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, that's one of the most important parts of any story, ensuring that the viewer's sympathy always remains where the writer wants them to. And even though the narrative does frame Jack as in the wrong for wanting to take over Christmas, he never once comes across as being a bad person for doing so, as it's made crystal clear that this desire is fueled solely by his boredom and desperation to try something new, and that there was never any malicious intent behind his actions or a desire to ruin the holiday. Heck, in Jack's obsession, he even says he thinks he can improve Christmas. But this is perhaps most plainly demonstrated when he talks to Santa after having him kidnapped, as he comes across as an excited kid who believes he's doing a man he admires a favor, failing to grasp both the severity of the situation as well as Santa's distress of what's going on. And there's also the fact that once he does realize all the damage he's caused, he becomes extremely emotionally distressed with remorse before opting to look on the bright side of things. And as I already touched on, this characterization of the embodiment of Halloween as a gentlemanly, if somewhat naive man with a very excitable streak may sound absurd on paper, but in practice makes for the perfect main character for the audience to get behind and watch. Because, as I had previously noted, apart from Sally and Santa Claus, he may just be the most human character in the movie, and it's that very humanity, as well as the fact that he doesn't have a bad bone in his body on top of that, that makes him so compelling to watch. Because even if he's ultimately wrong, one can't help but be fascinated by him and root for his problems to be solved regardless. Though what also helps is that even with all of his positive traits, it's still very obvious why he's the pumpkin king and is to be feared by all, with his final confrontation with Oogie Boogie perfectly demonstrating why he's not a man you want to mess with or make angry. And on that topic, because of his more questionable actions throughout the film, some have indeed debated whether or not he's actually meant to be the hero of the story, especially because Santa almost ending up dead wouldn't have happened if Jack hadn't ordered him kidnapped in the first place. But I already argued for why he is the good guy in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too. So just to quickly reiterate, he's framed in a light that's impossible not to sympathize with. Just because he makes mistakes, or is too blinded by his newfound enthusiasm or naivete, doesn't automatically make him a bad person, particularly because he completely owns up to what he had done and takes full responsibility after the fact. So not only are his actions beforehand perfectly understandable, but he also does everything right afterwards, not hesitating to apologize to Santa and admit that he was wrong without making any excuses. And as I pointed out many times, the fact that Santa is pretty quick to forgive him is only further proof of that, as even after everything he went through, he could see plain as day that Jack never meant any real harm. Though the fact that he did save him and act so outraged on his behalf probably helped too. And speaking of that, there's also that Oogie Boogie is meant to be the anti-Jack and flawlessly demonstrates why he's worthy of the audience's sympathy by comparison. Because unlike everybody else in Halloween Town, who are ultimately nice individuals who view the holiday and scaring others as simply a good-natured game, Oogie Boogie is actually evil and loves to torture and kill people. So not only do his malicious actions frame Jack's much more good-intentioned ones in a better light, but the fact that Jack clearly hates him on top of that is more than enough to reinforce how much of a good person he is. Especially because he had expressly said that he didn't want Oogie Boogie involved in Santa's kidnapping and wanted to make him comfortable. And Lock, Shock, and Barrel went behind his back and did exactly what he told them not to. So they're just as responsible for Santa ending up there as Jack is. Now, if Jack hadn't ordered Santa kidnapped in the first place, or tasked somebody more trustworthy with the job, then obviously that wouldn't have happened either. But once again, those actions were fueled by his naivete and his getting too caught up in Christmas. So even if his methods were wrong, his intentions weren't. And not to mention, there's also that by actually failing to become the new Santa Claus and almost ruining Christmas, he ends up telling a very different story than what is usually expected from the hero of a children's film, and especially a Disney one at that. Now, I got more into this in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too, but Jack's failure and it subsequently giving him back his love of Halloween does send a pretty healthy message to children, specifically that you can't always be what you want to be, or that your every wish may not come true, but you will find happiness in what you were meant to be. And that's exactly what happens with Jack, because simply put, Christmas was never the answer to his problems, as he had understandably grown bored with the repetitive nature of Halloween after having to do the same thing for possibly centuries. So while trying something completely new seemed like a logical answer at first, ultimately Jack is Halloween and nothing can change that. So not only does he make for a bad Santa Claus, but he comes to appreciate his own role again after realizing both that being the Pumpkin King is something only he can do, and that it's a great thing to be, and that Halloween can still be fresh and new if they try hard enough. To put it simply, Jack fails to remake Christmas in his own image, but that's okay because it pulls him out of his depression and makes him realize just how important being the leader of Halloween is, and that's ultimately more important. And again, telling people that you can find happiness in what you are, even if their dreams don't come true, is a very good message to convey. So as I said at the start, there's really nothing not to like about the character of Jack Skellington, as the narrative gets absolutely everything right about him, from his personality to his dynamic with the other characters to his personal journey to the message he ends up sending. And once again, the fact that he's done so well is in turn why the movie as a whole is so well regarded. Because even if there are plenty of other aspects to it that make it a great film, most definitely, The fact that it has such a perfect main character that knows exactly the kind of story it wants to tell with him is definitely among the most important. As a writer myself, I'll be the first person to say that how the hero is written can make or break a story just as much as the villain, and the fact that Jack Skellington may just be the best written character in a movie already full of great characters only reinforces that. Because even though the movie is centered around quite possibly the single biggest mistake he ever made, the way he's conveyed, as well as how it tells his story, still makes it one that's fascinating to sit through. He may not be a conventional hero by any means, but he still proves himself to be a man deserving of sympathy and a happy ending regardless. And if that doesn't make both him and the movie as a whole one of a kind in several different ways, then I really don't know what does. Alright, I think I've gone on about this for long enough. So now give me your opinions on this. Do you believe that Jack Skellington is one of the best main characters ever written for an animated film for any or all of the reasons I just went over? Or do you think he's simply average and that I'm giving him too much credit? Whatever the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video just because you watched it. You can feel any way you'd like about both Jack Skellington and The Nightmare Before Christmas as a whole that you'd like, and if you think I couldn't have been any more wrong, that is totally okay. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.